2005, this man would terrorize an entire community in Maine, and he's never been caught. In the sleepy town of Cape Elizabeth, this man, who became known as the Cape Intruder, began breaking into people's homes just to watch them sleep. The Cape Intruder would only break into homes where doors and windows were left unlocked, and he would never take anything or harm anybody, but he would just stand over the victims and watch them sleep. Some people would wake up to him standing over them, but he would always disappear before they could act. It left the entire town terrified and paranoid to go to sleep. It got to the point that there were so many break-ins that the community set up neighborhood watches to try and catch the man doing this. Victims came forward and worked with police to create this composite sketch. But the break-ins eventually stopped and the man was never caught. And to this day, the Cape Intruder is still out there.
This 340-pound mother sat on her child until he was dead. Jennifer Wilson sat on her son outside of her home in an attempt to stop him from acting up. And the even more disturbing part is that this whole situation was caught on Ring footage. They said the mother was on top of the child for at least 5 minutes, which is just insane. Jennifer was the adopted mother of the young 10-year-old boy who only weighed 90 pounds. And keep in mind, she weighed 340 pounds. The boy kept screaming and screaming as his mother tried to call the caseworker. Eventually, the boy stopped moving, and at one point she even asked him if he was faking it and saw his eyelids were extremely pale. When the police arrived, the young boy was no longer breathing and had no pulse. But what makes this case even sadder is before this happened, the young boy went to his neighbor's house and begged them to adopt him because he said his parents would hit him in the face. Jennifer Wilson was arrested and faces only 6 years in prison, which is not enough time at all in my opinion. This is absolutely disturbing and awful, and may this young boy rest in peace.
Have you ever heard about Letta the doll? What the fuck is that? The most haunted doll in Australia. And at first glance, bro, like that doll does not look like something that you would want to keep in your house.
Let me see the picture, bro.
Right.
It's not cursed, right?
Allegedly it's cursed, bro.
Oh, what? Oh, sorry. It looks creepy as fuck.
Yeah, but basically, this guy, Kerry Walton, was exploring an abandoned house that he used to be terrified as a kid to go to. He ends up seeing something that at first he thought it was a kid's body. So he was tripping out, bro. He ends up, taking it out, and it was a doll, right? A medium and a psychic investigated the doll. Turns out that it had a spirit of a 6-year-old boy who had drowned, and that his father made this doll because of the grieving loss of his son.
Damn, it's fucking sad.
And he made this doll that had his appearance but kind of like exaggerated, and that now the spirit of the little boy haunts the doll. The doll has actual human hair.
Let me see the doll again. Yo.
And now I'm gonna show you an old video where it featured them in like a show on TV.
So it's timing to present a story that may cause a few shivers on the spine. How spooky have you found having possession of this doll?
Very spooky.
Why?
Things falling off walls, people being afraid, people just not wanting to come into the house where he is.
That's why rule number 1, you never buy dolls from yard sales.
And then he goes to explain that he did try to sell the doll before, but
This man won the lottery and then took his own life shortly after. In June 1997, Billy Bob Harrell Jr. became a millionaire overnight after winning the 31 million Texas Lotto jackpot. Billy Jr.'s life before winning was full of financial struggle, and him, his wife, and their 3 children battled every single day to make ends meet. So the lottery win initially changed his family's life. Billy quit his job, took a family trip to Hawaii, and generously donated to his church and helped friends and family. However, his newfound wealth led to a lot of old friends and acquaintances asking him for financial assistance on almost a daily basis. This forced him to change his phone number. Over the course of the next year, his life began to slowly unravel, leading to him separating from his wife. On May 22nd, 1999, just shy of the 2-year anniversary of his big win, Billy Bob Harrell Jr. tragically ended his own life. Billy had expressed his unhappiness to a financial advisor shortly before his passing, telling them, "Winning the lottery is the worst thing that ever happened to me."
Out of the hundreds of self-unaliving cases I've seen, this has got to be the most shocking and distressing of all. It was November 2014 in the Ukrainian town of Sumy. During the busy lunchtime rush on one of the days, a Ukrainian man could be heard loudly talking about how upset he was that he'd lost his job. Now, the area had recently seen a lot of people be made redundant due to financial and economic struggles in the area. The man had been queuing in Cathedral Street at a fast food restaurant and strangely had stepped out of the queue just before he was about to get served. The male, who was thought to be in his 30s, then approached a fence in front of full view of all of the members of the public that were around. He pushed his head through the fence and then bent it until it snapped in front of horrified onlookers. Horrendously, there'd also been children passing by who witnessed this. Screams could be heard from witnesses and an ambulance was called, but the man was horrifically pronounced dead at the scene. How public and how violent this death was just really, really shook me.
Getting divorced because of our decision. It's my best friend. I still love her to death. Like, we still got a child together. We still gonna be hanging out.
The husband that you just saw in that video murdered his wife. But according to the police in Nashville, it was a suicide. And they fought the victim's family members, claiming that it was a suicide and not a murder for over a year. Just recently, the man in that video was arrested, but he still may escape justice. My wife and I have been working with the family of the victim on this case for a while now, and we really need your help to make sure justice is served. But first, we need to tell you the story of what happened. On July 29th, 2023, at around 3:30 in the afternoon, the Nashville Fire Department was called to the apartment of April Holt, an apartment that she shared with her then husband Donovan Holt and April's two children, Serenity and Denzel. Now, according to what Donovan, the husband, told the police, April had gone into the bathroom of their apartment, she had gone quiet, and eventually he discovered that she had killed herself. And that's when he found her lying unresponsive on the floor. Now, initially, Donovan failed to disclose a major piece of information that was discovered at the crime scene. That April Holt was discovered with a black garbage bag type sack wrapped tightly around her head. He did not tell the responding officers about this bag. He didn't tell the hospital staff. He did not tell April's family members. But at the end of the day, it didn't end up mattering. Because as you can see on these official reports, after examining April's body, the medical examiner, the autopsy technician, they all agreed that she had simply killed herself. But we have to introduce Jamie. Jamie is April's biological mother. A little background on Jamie. Jamie got pregnant when she was a teenager in high school and decided that she would have her baby. So that led to April being born. And while she was in high school, Jamie met her future husband, Jeremiah. The two of them then raised April and the other children they would have. And to this day, they remain a happy family. Well, minus one of them. Jamie, from the moment that April was found dead inside of her apartment, knew that something wasn't right. And so she immediately started raising the alarm. She was informing detectives of the fights that April and Donovan had been getting into. She informed them of the fact that April had recently started filing for divorce. She told them that April, just days before she was killed, had been sexually assaulted by someone that wasn't her husband. She was raising red flag after red flag. But time and time again, detectives with the Nashville PD told her, you need to stop looking into this. This is a suicide, not a murder. I'm putting some notes on screen right now showing the efforts that Jamie, April's mother, went to try get this suicide ruling overturned and changed to a homicide ruling. She wrote letters to every single public official she could think of. She wrote letters to the chief of police. She wrote letters to the district attorney. She even sent letters to the governor and the White House. But no one seemed to be listening. But why was Jamie so convinced that this was a murder and not a suicide? Well, it's pretty crazy, actually. First of all, April's young son, Denzel, actually heard Donovan and April arguing in the bathroom just a short while before April was found dead. At one point, Denzel even claimed that he looked under the bathroom door and saw his mother lying on the ground, silent, not moving. After he saw this, Donovan came out of the bathroom. Donovan then cooked the kids a meal in the kitchen, and after a little while, Donovan sent Denzel, his young son, into the bedroom to check on April, his mother. Yes, that's right. Denzel ended up being the one that found his own mother lying unresponsive on the floor of the bathroom. So things about this timeline don't necessarily make sense. There's the fact that Denzel saw his mother April lying on the floor of their bedroom unresponsive, and she was later found in the bathroom unresponsive. There's the fact that Denzel did not see the bag over his mother's head when he first saw her lying on the bedroom floor. There's the fact that Donovan and April were allegedly, according to Denzel, screaming at each other, yelling. But according to Donovan's official story at the time that this all happened, they just happened to walk in there and find April unresponsive. The last time he saw her, she was acting normally, and she had done something in that bathroom to end her own life. But this story gets more convoluted as you go down the rabbit hole. And in my next TikTok, I'm going to expose some of the most insane failures that I've ever seen from a police department to investigate a crime properly. Keep watching, I'm trying to make this story blow up. So if you've made it this far, there's a petition in my TikTok bio that I'm going to link, and it's a petition to get these charges that Donovan is charged with upgraded so that he can receive the justice that he deserves. Now, all parties are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law, but as you're going to see in the next TikTok video that I'm posting, Donovan was recently arrested, and it was found that his entire story, the thing that he swore by happened to the police, was a complete and utter fabrication. And when I show you the details of what exactly happened, I think that you all are going to be shocked. But please help us get justice for April Holt by signing the petition linked in my bio. And if you're interested in this story and seeing what happens next, go check out the second part of this series.
This might be the craziest and most intense cartel encounter ever. What I'm about to show you is the US Coast Guard raiding a high-speed submarine in the Eastern Pacific Ocean moving more than 17,000 pounds of cocaine. On June 18, 2019, a Coast Guard surveillance aircraft tracked the drug-filled narco sub hundreds of miles off the Colombian and Ecuadorian coastline, and the video shows a member of the Coast Guard riding on top of the speeding sub, pounding on the hatch and demanding it to come to a stop. The video then ends with the presumed trafficker emerging from the narco sub, putting his hands up in surrender. In total, 5 alleged smugglers were seized aboard the vessel. Now, just watch this video. It's absolutely insane, and it's something straight out of a video game.
That's gonna be hard to get on. Alto Barco!
Imagine leaping out of a plane when your parachute fails. You're plummeting to the ground to what you think is certain death. For all this time, your husband has been plotting your murder. Victoria and Emile Killiers met in 2009. Victoria claimed that he utterly charmed her. She said the relationship with Emile was nothing like she'd ever experienced before. After a matter of weeks, they were inseparable. They'd both been married before and were really keen to finally settle down with the right person. They'd also both been in the army previously, so they felt like they had a lot in common. Emile grew up in South Africa and really captivated Victoria with his tales of growing up. He ended up proposing to her in 2011 in South Africa. They were both at a cheetah sanctuary, and he had organised for one of the cheetahs to have the engagement ring in their collar. Victoria was obviously over the moon. Things were going really well with the pair, but then Victoria discovered that Emile had financial issues. He continuously lied to her about money, but she wanted to work through things. She found out that she was pregnant just a couple of months before they were due to get married. Now, they were both really happy about this. However, tragically, the pregnancy came to an end and Emile was not supportive of Victoria at all. They did end up eventually having 2 children together, but the warning signs were there from the beginning. While Victoria was pregnant with their second child, she got a shocking call from the babysitter's mum. Now, this babysitter was just a 16-year-old girl. The mum claimed that Emile had been texting the 16-year-old asking if she had a boyfriend and telling her she looked nice. Emile lied about this whole thing and claimed that his phone has been hacked. She then found a receipt for 2 people from a restaurant in his jeans pocket and also found some incriminating text messages of other women on his phone. Again, he lied to cover his tracks, and Victoria was pregnant and vulnerable. Behind the scenes, Emile was not only in inappropriate contact with his ex-wife, he was also having an affair with a woman called Stephanie Goller, a woman he'd met on a dating app. In 2015, the relationship between Emile and Victoria was noticeably fragmented. The pair had had their second child very recently, and Emile was spending a lot of time away from home. He also even hinted at them breaking up. Shortly after the birth of their second child, while Emile was away, Victoria went downstairs early one morning. She could smell gas. Luckily, she sorted this straight away and it didn't harm anybody, but she did joke to Emile, "Are you trying to kill me?" and he was really defensive. Not long after, on the 4th of April 2014, the pair went to an airfield together in Wiltshire. Victoria was an experienced skydiving instructor, but she hadn't been out skydiving in ages. Obviously, she'd been pregnant. Emil had planned the whole thing suspiciously, and Victoria was just really glad that he wanted to spend some time with her. He seemed very keen to make this happen, even when she was kind of putting roadblocks in the way because she'd had a bad night's sleep with the baby. He was saying, well, why don't you go on your own to do this jump and I'll look after the baby. They made it work and they eventually went to the airfield together. And Emil notably had been left with the parachute for an extended period of time. No one thought anything of this at the time though, and Victoria went up to do her jump. She leapt out of the plane around 3,000 feet up. Terrifyingly, her main and her reserve parachute failed. She started spinning violently and plummeted towards the ground. First responders raced over to her with a body bag. They were that convinced she was dead. Miraculously, she had survived, but she had broken ribs, collarbone, and a fractured pelvis. The Army Parachute Association were suspicious and reported this to police. The husband was the prime suspect from early on. After an extensive investigation, police came to the conclusion that Emil had tried to kill his wife twice. The first time was that gas leak. Now, what was the motive? I mean, obviously it would solve his money woes if he could claim on a life insurance policy. And it turned out there was one in place for the value of around £120,000. He would also be free to just start a relationship with a new woman. He was ultimately found guilty of 2 counts of attempted murder and was given life with a minimum of 18 years.
Remember that one scene that everybody talks about?
And which one?
Terrifier 2, the bedroom scene.
Yeah, I'm never gonna forget that. That specific scene constantly like
plays in your mind.
Yeah, bro.
And the way that she was ripped, like
her arms were ripped off, her scalp was skinned off, bleach on her soul. Even though I know it's fake, just can't handle the gore.
That scene scarred a lot of people. But the director, right, when he was trying to think of ways that art was gonna murder people, he was trying to get inspiration from medieval torture methods back in the day, right? Then he came across this picture of what used to be a body on a bed. How he described it was, it didn't even look human, bro. Come to find out that that picture was a victim of Jack the Ripper,
the infamous
serial killer that was never found
from the UK.
Yes. So he got inspiration from Jack the Ripper. He tried to like think of a way how that could have happened, because I'm gonna show you the picture.
Fuck.
Yo, I don't think you're ready for this, bro.
I'm not ready. What the fuck?
The original picture is black and white. This is the colorized version.
Yeah, I'm guessing that's the original picture right there.
Yeah. Yo, let me know if you guys like that shit. Like, I know a lot of people are into the whole gore stuff. And shout out to the TikToker who I learned that from. It's Jiggy Saws.
Sarah, for everything you've done to me. Sarah. Fuck you.
Sarah. The man who was zipped into that suitcase begging to be let out died. And his girlfriend at the time who zipped him in there was just found guilty of second-degree murder. Meet 47-year-old Sarah Boone. According to the authorities, back in 2020 when all this happened, Sarah and her then boyfriend Jorge were drinking Chardonnay, and they decided to play a game of hide and seek. Now apparently they thought it would be funny, that's a quote, if they zipped Jorge into a suitcase during all of this. But then Jorge started to complain that he couldn't breathe. He was zipped into the... But even though he was pleading for help, Sarah didn't listen. In fact, Sarah decided to go upstairs and she went to bed, even after hearing her boyfriend pleading for her to let him out, saying that he couldn't breathe and was freaking out. In the video footage, which is disturbing, you can hear Sarah mocking Jorge as he's stuck inside of the suitcase, saying, "That's what I feel like when you cheat on me." And yeah, it was eventually discovered later on when Sarah woke up that Jorge had died inside of that suitcase. Now, Sarah was eventually arrested and charged with murder, and like I said, she was just found guilty of second-degree murder for this entire affair. If you want to hear more true crime stories like this, listen to the podcast that I co-host with my wife, Murder in America, available on all streaming platforms, or you can listen to my new show, The Conspiracy Files, which airs on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on YouTube in video form.
Some people think that this is a case of vigilante justice. Jade Jenks is a 39-year-old interior designer who was just found guilty of murdering her stepdad after finding hundreds of nude photos of herself on his computer. On January 2nd, 2021, authorities found the body of Tom Merriman under a pile of garbage in Jade's Solana Beach, California driveway. According to Jade, on New Year's Eve, she'd been driving an extremely drunken Tom around when he fell asleep inside of her car. She stated that he was too heavy to move, so she let him sleep it off and went inside. The two lived right next door to each other, and Jade was basically Tom's caregiver. They even shared a driveway. When Jade returned the next day, she reportedly found him deceased in her car, and after panicking, she left his body under a pile of garbage in her driveway. Just a few days prior, Jade was cleaning Tom's house when she bumped into his computer. When it lit up, she noticed that a nude photo was set as a screensaver, but it wasn't just any nude photo, it was a photo of her. When she looked into it, she discovered hundreds of nude photos of herself on his computer, dating back to when she was just 16 years old. Jade was arrested after Tom's body was found, and after reportedly drugging him with sleeping pills and painkillers, eventually strangling him. During the trial, a series of texts from the day he died came to light. In one text to a male friend, Jade states, quote, "I just dosed the hell out of him," end quote. She later texted the same friend, quote, "It's pretty much done. I can't keep a kicking body in my truck. I'm about to club him on the head and he's waking up," end quote. She reportedly asked the male friend to help move his body out of the back seat of her vehicle. Also during the trial, it was reported that Tom was a known alcoholic who reportedly often mixed sleeping pills with alcohol. But despite that, Jade was convicted of first-degree murder. She'll be sentenced in April and faces up to life in prison. This is the exact moment that 11-year-old Carly Brucia was kidnapped. On February 1st, 2004, Carly had been staying the night with a friend in Sarasota, Florida. At around 6:15 p.m., she began the 1-mile walk back to her house to watch the Super Bowl with her family. After she left, her friend's mom called Carly's mom to make sure it was okay that she walk back by herself, but Carly's mom didn't want her to walk alone on Bee Ridge Road as it's super busy. So she sent Carly's stepdad to go and pick her up. But Carly was nowhere to be found. Within 30 minutes, Carly's parents reported her missing and a massive search was launched. Police brought in bloodhounds, which tracked her scent to Evie's car wash, which is also along Bee Ridge Road, but her scent disappeared behind the back of the business. Authorities reviewed video footage from the car wash's security cameras and found this. This all took place just a few minutes after leaving her friend's house. Also caught on video was a yellow Buick pulling into the parking lot 3 minutes before Carly was abducted. Authorities issued an Amber Alert, but sadly it was too late. Upon releasing the security footage to the public, the man in the video was identified as Joseph Smith. Joseph was on probation for unrelated drug charges at the time of Carly's abduction, and he had previous charges of kidnapping and false imprisonment. He'd been released from prison only 13 months prior and had already violated his probation twice, which should have sent him back to prison, but police didn't do anything about those violations. When tracking down Joseph, police found he was already in custody for drug charges after being arrested 2 days after the abduction of Carly. A few days later, Joseph admitted to sexually assaulting and strangling Carly to death and led authorities to her body. She was found behind a church nearly 3 miles from the abduction site. Carly was found deceased, laying on her back, nude from the waist down, and had a deep ligature mark on her neck. DNA evidence found on Carly and in Joseph's vehicle confirmed his story, and he was then arrested for her abduction and murder. He was convicted on all charges and sentenced to death, but in 2021, he died in prison while awaiting execution. Joseph has since been named a suspect in the unsolved murder of 25-year-old Tara Riley, who was found in a retention pond behind a Walmart in Bradenton, Florida in 2000.
You ever heard about something called Ghost Watch?
I want to say yes, but I don't know.
I probably just triggered some nostalgia horror for certain people, especially for our older heads. Ghost Watch was a BBC Halloween special that aired in the UK back in 1992, so mad long ago, bro. It was so terrifying that it was actually banned from airing on TV ever again, and it also caused a death. It had a bunch of BBC presenters and reporters trying to get evidence on the existence of ghosts. At the time, it was very unique because it was live. They were investigating a house in which the Early family was claiming that they were being haunted by this malevolent spirit, which they called Mr. Pipes, and they start hearing actual bangs around the house.
We will stay with you. What was that? Where are we going?
And Suzanne ends up speaking in like a demonic voice.
Stop it! Stop it, Susie. Get out. Get out if you don't want to be here. You just mess things up.
It seems fake though.
This whole thing was actually fake. In the beginning, it actually played a disclaimer saying what you're about to see is staged. But when people tuned in, they tuned in mid-showing, so they didn't see the beginning. And also, the calls, right? There would be like an automated message saying how whatever you're watching right now is fake. But since there was thousands of people calling the studio, the line got jammed, so all they heard was literally just white noise. So they thought what the fuck was happening on the show was real. Like I mentioned, there was a death caused by this. So there was an 18-year-old kid named Martin. While he was watching this, he started acting weird, curled up into a ball while never taking his eyes off the screen, as if he was being hypnotized by the show. So keep in mind also,
Fire Festival 2 is happening next year apparently, so let's talk about Fire Festival because that was wild. Pablo Escobar's private island, private jets, and the most luxurious and exclusive music festival you could have ever imagined. That's what people were promised. The reality of the ill-fated Fire Festival couldn't have been more different. So let's talk about what actually happened at Fire Festival, and I've gone into loads more juicy details on the podcast The Bourne Investigation. In 2013, Billy McFarland founded a company called Magnesis. It was an exclusive members-only club, and this is how he met Ja Rule. They built another business together called Fire Media. In order to promote this business, which was effectively like a talent booking app, they decided to put on a music festival. They got a bunch of influencers involved like Hailey Baldwin, Kendall Jenner, etc. to promote this festival, and it was really successful in promoting it. Tickets started flying off the shelves. The tickets were so expensive though, some promised private yachts, a full crew included, and private chefs. Some tickets were like $25,000 per person. The team ended up booking talent like Major Lazer and my favourites Blink-182 to perform at the festival. However, the island that they planned to host this event on had less than ideal infrastructure. The Wi-Fi was sketchy, loads of things started going wrong, Billy fired the catering company. It just turned into a bit of a mess. They also spent a lot of money. There were rumours that they had already spent $4 million on just booking the artists alone. Money was running out and they started to realise that they'd overpromised. There weren't adequate toilet facilities, let alone enough food and water to feed everybody that was attending. Time and money was running out, and in order to try and pull this off, Billy decided to try and just squeeze more money out of people who'd already bought tickets. Even though they only had these like leftover hurricane disaster relief tents for these people, not the luxury villas that they'd been sold, the team sent out emails baiting the partygoers into loading more money onto what they called a fire band, which was like Apple Pay kind of. It was to basically make it a cashless experience. On the 27th of April, just the day prior to the event, Blink-182 pulled out. People started sensing things were going wrong. The following day, though, it was showtime and it turned into pure mayhem. At 7:40 a.m, Fire Festival tweeted, "We're currently working through the unexpected start to Fire Festival. Thank you for bearing with us as we attempt to accommodate guest needs." They then tweeted stating that due to circumstances beyond their control, inbound flights have been cancelled. Unfortunately, though, loads of people had already turned up on the island. Cue the confusion and chaos. People who attended the festival said that when they showed up, there was just absolutely no information, nobody telling them where they should go. Meanwhile, the campsite was absolute horror. It had chucked it down with rain on the lead up to the festival, so everything had got completely soaked. Hours and hours later, as the sun was going down, Billy McFarland stood on a table and basically just told everyone it was a bit of a free-for-all. He said no matter what ticket you purchased, you need to just go and run and grab a tent. So that's what people did. People were pushing and shoving and just acting like animals, to be honest, and scrambling to get their luggage and tents. This tweet of a cheese sandwich went viral, which just absolutely summed up the entire festival. It really made me laugh because the caption was moaning about how awful the food was, and it does look like an awful cheese sandwich, but part of the caption was moaning that there was no salad dressing, and I just thought the salad dressing is the least of your concerns. Organisers cancelled the festival, but it was too late for a lot of people that were already there and were now stranded on an island. There weren't enough flights to accommodate taking everyone home straight away, and many people were locked in the airport with no food or water. I think the sad thing about Fire Festival is the local people who were really taken advantage of and put so much time and effort into trying to make this this festival happen, and they ended up not getting paid, and in some instances had even spent their own savings to try and cover some of the funds. Days after the festival concluded, a $100 million lawsuit was filed against the fire team. They were accused of fraud, amongst other things. Billy was arrested in June 2017 for wire fraud. Now, he was let out on bail, but he didn't stop there. He helped create a scheme called NYC VIP Access, which promised to sell these people discounted tickets to the Met Gala and Taylor Swift meet and greets. They didn't have these tickets to sell. In 2018, Billy was given 6 years in prison and was released in 2022. Now, shockingly, he's now out and is promising a Fire Festival 2 in 2025. I can't wait to see what happens with this. Now, I know that Billy has done a lot of things wrong, and it is really sad for the local people, and I feel really bad for these people who have been scammed by this man. However, there's just something really likeable about Billy McFarland. I can't quite put my finger on it. I feel maybe this is why people get so charmed by him, because he is a likeable character, even though he's done a lot of things wrong. Like I said, I go into a big deep dive on my podcast about this, so please head over there if you're interested.
However, coined the phrase, "You can't make this stuff up," might have known the story of real-life boogeyman Albert Fish. A slight, elderly man with grey hair. No one suspected the kindly single father of being sadistic child murderer and cannibal.
Cuddling facts that you wish you never knew. Part 22. In the 18th century, you could bring your cat or dog to the London Zoo and actually pay your admission by feeding it to the lions. Bus seats are specifically designed so you can't tell how dirty they really are. When an octopus reproduces, it removes its penis and throws it at the female so she can impregnate herself, and then he grows back another one. Oysters are actually alive when they're served. They don't die until you eat them. In Australia, there's a plant called the gimbi, which has such a severe sting that when horses brush up against it, they actually throw themselves off a cliff because they would rather die than experience the pain. Live chat support agents can see what you type before they send it so they can reply quicker. Spider rain, yes, you heard me right, is a real and naturally occurring phenomenon.
What are some of the craziest things people have confessed to in their final moments? In this series, I'm sharing the wildest ones I could find. And I cover lots of true crime and spooky stuff on this page, so follow along. In 1867, the body of 18-year-old Christine Kett was found in her parents' kitchen. No one had any idea who had done it, but there were a few clues found by her. Like the fact that it was her brother's pistol that was found next to her body. But then, the autopsy showed that Christine's wounds were not consistent with that kind of weapon. There were also these tracks found outside of the house and on the fence, making it look like it was someone who came from the outside in. But despite all that, this case went unsolved for 17 years, until someone confessed to doing it with their last breath. It turns out that her mother had lost her mind while Christine was taking too long to cook dinner. She went at her with an axe and then put her own son's weapon next to her daughter's body to implicate him in the crime. If you've been enjoying the series, then you'll love the whole episode I did on it on my podcast.
This is Mary Wilson. She was born in County Durham in the late 1800s. She married her first husband, John Knowles, in the early 1910s, and they remained married for over 40 years. John Knowles died in 1955 after being ill for roughly a year. 5 months after his death, Mary married her lover, John Russell. John Russell died in 1956 after being ill for roughly a week. Mary was left with a £42 inheritance from both deaths, which is around £1,000 today. Mary married again in September 1956. Her third husband, Oliver Leonard, died the following month in October 1956. Mary was left with £50, which is around £1,200 today. She married again on October 28, 1957, and her new husband died 15 days later on November 12, 1957. Post-mortems later found traces of phosphorus in all the men's bodies. Mary was sentenced to death on March 29, 1958, but her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment. She died on January 10, 1963. For more on this case, check out my British Murders podcast. It's the 4th episode of Season 3, link in bio.
Let's talk about the Barbie and Ken killers. Paul Bernardo and Carla Homolka met at a bar in Canada in 1987. They got married just 2 months later, and over the course of nearly 3 years, murdered at least 3 teenage girls. The first victim was Carla's little sister Tammy, who the couple drugged with animal tranquilizers, raped, and tortured to death. The second was 14-year-old Leslie Mahaffey, who the couple brutally tortured and sexually abused before strangling Leslie and cutting her body up into little pieces and placing them into concrete blocks. The third victim, Kristen French, was abducted in 1992 and her naked body was found just 4 days later by police. This eventually led to the couple's arrest and both of them to be charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder. Carla was given a 12-year sentence, whereas Paul was given life in prison because Carla actually testified against him in court. Carla has been out of jail for a few years and is now married to her attorney's brother and has 3 children.
I want to talk about one of the worst accidents to ever happen on a film set, because this moment made the final cut of the movie. So this moment's coming from The Wizard of Oz, which already has a whole list of horrible things that happened on set, which is why I made an entire podcast episode about its dark history. In this shot, it looks like the Wicked Witch disappears behind a giant fireball. To do this stunt, the Wicked Witch was supposed to jump on this platform, which would take her underneath the stage so she could jump off the platform and then the fireball would erupt. But if you watch closely, you can see the timing's off. The platform starts going down before she's on it, meaning that this fireball erupted before she had time to get off the platform. This caused her hat and her head to catch fire, which led to 2nd and 3rd degree burns all over her face and body. But the worst part of all is that this makeup she's wearing is copper based, meaning that even when they put the fire out on her face, the copper in the makeup was so hot it continued to melt her skin. And the only thing they had on set to take off the makeup and not infect the burns was rubbing alcohol. Some of the cast said that they remembered hearing her screams from below the stage, not because of the fire, but because of the rubbing alcohol that was being scrubbed into her burns. There is way more dark history to The Wizard of Oz, including more toxic makeup, so make sure you listen to the episode to hear more.
Whatever you're doing, stop scrolling, because this might just be one of the most compelling Skinwalker videos I've ever seen. Check it out.
Look, there's 2 more black dots. Cody. Oh, what the crap? Is that a guy? What the frick?
What the fuck?
What was that?
He's walking creepy.
Dude, that was a skinwalker. What?
Follow him.
I videoed it. What the frick?
So what do you guys think? Was this just a person? Some sort of animal? Or could this have been a skinwalker?
10-year-old vanished while out hunting with his granddad, and what has happened is shocking. Wyatt Eves Nibbert from West Virginia had gone out squirrel hunting with his granddad on the 9th of September. Wyatt and his granddad were apparently eating lunch, and Wyatt said he was going off to look for some squirrels. His granddad apparently remained where he was and tidied up. He then called out for the boy, and apparently Wyatt never came. The granddad couldn't find him, and then an hour after the boy had gone missing, police responded to a vehicle accident involving the granddad. Tragically, the boy was found dead days after this. He was found deceased with a single gunshot wound. Police have not yet stated whether they suspect foul play.
This is the scariest song in the world, and here's why. Okay, so we all heard this song before, especially if you're into scary things and watch the Insidious movies. But do you know the very disturbing and chilling backstory behind this song? Well, the song is called Tiptoe Through the Tulips, and it was recorded and released in 1968 by American singer Tiny Tim. And when the song was first released, it didn't have the scary reputation it has now. However, this would change during his last ever live performance of the song. On September 28th, 1996, Tiny Tim suffered a heart attack that was pretty miniature while performing at a music festival. And after this happened, his doctors advised him that he wasn't healthy enough to perform on stage anymore. However, Tiny Tim ignored the advice from his doctors and scheduled another concert at a women's club in Minnesota the next month. But right before his performance, he told his wife that he wasn't feeling that good. Nevertheless, Tiny Tim decided to go on stage anyway. And after performing the last song of the night, he suffered a major heart attack on stage and died in front of the crowd. And the song he was performing was Tiptoe Through the Tulips. This song was already terrifying, but it's 100 times more terrifying after knowing this. Now listen to it again after knowing this.
Seven-year-old Malachi was killed after being hit by a taxi while he was walking the streets of Bradford alone in the dark. So why was this 7-year-old boy alone in the dark on the streets of Bradford? Malachi's mother, Wendy Hall, who was 33, had left him in that house by himself while she went to visit her boyfriend for the night. It was a house that they'd previously lived in, so Malachi was familiar with it. They'd recently moved out to go and stay with Wendy's sister, but had gone back to pick up some belongings. Wendy intended to take Malachi to stay with her boyfriend for the night, but Malachi changed his mind and said he wanted to stay there. Instead of staying there with him or refusing to let him stay in a cold house and taking him back to her sister's, she left him in that house alone at 10 o'clock at night with no gas and no electric, and she went to stay at her boyfriend's house. She left him her phone so he could play on games while she was away. She locked the door behind her, but Malachi shortly after that got up, unlocked the deadbolt and went to find his mum. He was walking the streets of Bradford in the dark when he was hit by a taxi. He died at the scene and police found Wendy's mobile phone in his pocket. They managed to trace Wendy to her boyfriend's house to let her know that her son had died, and she had to go to the hospital to identify his body. The only defence that she had for the police was that she didn't think Malachi could unlock the door. She gave no excuses for why she left him there by himself. Prosecutors said that this was a deliberate disregard for the welfare of Malachi, a deliberate decision to leave him in that house with no gas or electric. She pleaded guilty to neglect, and on the 13th of April 2023, she was sentenced to just 5 years in prison. She will have to live with the fact that that decision that night led to the death of her son.
This case is absolutely sickening. This mother murdered 6 of her children by intentionally starting a house fire. It was the 7th of July 1992 and the fire service was called to a house fire in East Baltimore. They responded to the horrific scene and found the bodies of 4 children in the inferno. 2 children who had been rushed to hospital eventually died from their injuries. The children's mother, Tonya Lucas, was apparently due to be evicted from the house that morning. Witnesses testified that she bought and used a huge amount of the substance CC prior to the blaze. She'd also been undertaking S work in order to afford the substance. It was clear that her one child, Gregory Cook, who was only 2 years old, was a victim of abuse leading up to the fire due to him apparently resembling a skeleton. The medical examiner determined that the children's deaths were due to smoke inhalation. They were all determined to be homicides. A witness actually testified that Tonya had told him she was going to set her house on fire because of the pending eviction. She apparently was under the impression that a charity would provide her with a house if her house was to go up in flames. A witness watched the mother squirt some liquid in the lounge and callously start the fire. Now, some believe that Tonya is innocent, however, she has recently admitted to these crimes. She's had several trials relating to this case and served 23 years in prison. Her previous conviction was overturned on a technicality and 2 trials ended in hung juries. She has now accepted a plea deal on 1 count of arson and 6 counts of murder. She's been resentenced to life in prison, taking into account the time that she's already served, and has now been placed on probation.
This man claims to have seen his deceased sister. He says that 3 nights ago, he suddenly woke up, and what he saw terrified him. He said that when he looked up, he saw his sister sitting at the foot of his bed, just smiling at him. The only thing was, his sister died 6 years ago from a drug overdose. He says he was so in shock that he was just staring at her. He said that she was almost transparent. Suddenly, as he was looking into her eyes, they turned black. He said that he turned as fast as he could to his lamp and turned on the light, and when he looked back, she was gone. He said that this all happened in probably about 5 to 8 seconds. Afterwards, he woke up his wife and told her what happened. He was in tears. He couldn't stop crying. He said that his wife checked the foot of his bed, and she told him that it was still warm, as if someone had been sitting on it. He says he knows what he saw and that he wasn't dreaming, and he doesn't know if this was really the ghost of his sister or if it was something pretending to be her. He said that he's lived in the same house for about 2 years now, and they haven't had any paranormal experiences that he can remember. He says the only thing that's different now is that his wife is pregnant, and ever since she's been pregnant, he's been having strange dreams of his sister. This was just the first time that he saw her when he wasn't sleeping. He says that most of the dreams have been pleasant up until this moment. In his dreams, he'll just hear his sister singing like she used to, And he'll also have dreams of them playing soccer like they used to when they were kids. So what do you think this means? Could this have been the ghost of his deceased sister? Or do you think that this was something pretending to be her? Let me know in the comments down below.
This pedophile funeral director invited another man to come smoke meth and abuse a corpse with him in a funeral home in England. This story is extremely disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. Meet Nigel Robinson Wright, who was 42 at the time of his arrest. So online, Nigel had a completely different life than in person. In the real world, Nigel was overseeing funerals and helping people deal with the process of death and grief. But online, Nigel frequented pedophile chat rooms. He egged people on who were essaying animals. He chatted with people about his arousal with dead bodies. And he even offered to show up to a man's house who offered him his own toddler to abuse. So these chats eventually got so extreme that they were turned over to the police. And when the police went to Nigel's house, they confiscated all of his electronic devices, and that's where they found some very disturbing things. There were all sorts of different pornographic videos found on Nigel's devices. Videos that involved animals, dogs, children, and yes, corpses. So Nigel was seeking out all of this violent, extreme material on the internet and even commissioning other users to create this content for him. And in those chats, the authorities discovered Nigel and an acquaintance talking about their previous time spent in the funeral home that Nigel managed. Yes, some of these chats were extremely graphic and involved doing things with dead bodies that humans should never be doing. And they talked about how they had done other things all throughout the funeral home, in the chapel, on the benches, everywhere. So at the end of the day, Nigel was sentenced to 17 years in prison. I don't think that's nearly long enough of a sentence, but yeah, he's gonna be out, in a decade or so. And judging by this dude's twisted mind and his past on the internet, I definitely don't think it's gonna be safe to have him back out in society. The story of the plane crash after 9/11 on November 12th, 2001 is scary for multiple reasons. So let's talk about it. This is American Airlines Flight 587. Yes, this is the exact plane that crashed into the ground. So on November 12th, 2001, this flight took off from JFK Airport in New York. On board that day were 260 people. There were 251 passengers and 9 crew members. Now, this happened literally 2 months and a day after 9/11, so people were already very afraid of what was happening in the skies. But essentially, a number of errors within the crew of the plane and the turbulence they were hitting led to the plane making a sharp dive. Basically, the vertical stabilizer on the plane failed, which caused the plane to, like I said, dive. It punched downwards into a spin, and it crashed in a neighborhood in New York. So 5 people who were on the ground died as a result of this crash, who I assume were just hanging out in their houses since this plane crashed into a neighborhood. And all 260 people on board the plane perished as well. So obviously, since this happened so close to 9/11, people claim that this might have been a terrorist attack. There were massive investigations launched by the United States government, other governments, and some people even came forward and claimed that they had something to do with the attack. But eventually it was determined that it was just this combination of mistakes, turbulence, other things that went into all of this that caused the plane to go down. But remember at the beginning of the story that I said that this was really scary? Well, obviously a plane crash out of nowhere is terrifying, but here's the kicker. So on that morning, November 12th, 2001, New Jersey's lottery had a pick 3 drawing. People could pick any 3 numbers, and then, that was the day that they were determining which numbers would win. Well, on that day, both of the drawings that happened, one in the morning and one at night, contained the numbers of the doomed flight. The morning drawing was 578, and the drawing at night was 587. Now, I don't really believe in coincidences, and I don't know how that would possibly relate to all of this, but you cannot deny that a plane crash that happens a state over seemed to be predicted by that lottery drawing. I mean, flight 587, and they draw 578 and 587. That is just too weird to be a coincidence.
After the events involving Jason Voorhees at Pinehurst Halfway House, Camp Crystal Lake was renamed Forest Green. Tommy Jarvis returned to Forest Green with his friend Alan, in the hopes that they would cremate Jason's body. Tommy hoped that would finally end his hallucinations. They dug up Jason's body from the cemetery, but Tommy had a flashback of murdering Jason when he saw his body. Tommy snapped and stabbed Jason's corpse with a metal fence post. Lightning then struck the metal post and revived Jason. Jason then killed Alan and retrieved his hockey mask, which Tommy had brought with him to the cemetery. Tommy made his way to the sheriff's office but was arrested. Sheriff Garris, who was well aware of Tommy's mental problems, ignored his warning that Jason had returned. Soon after, councillors Darren and Lisbeth got lost looking for the camp and ran into Jason. He promptly killed them using the metal post that had resurrected him. The following day, Sheriff Garris's daughter Megan, her friends Sissy and Court, and Lisbeth's sister Paula asked him to search for the missing pair. Tommy warned them about Jason, but as usual he was ignored. Jason then stumbled across a corporate paintball game in the woods. He proceeded to kill every player and took their equipment. Jason soon realised his newfound strength as he ripped off one of the paintballer's arms by accident. The campers then arrived at Forest Green, whilst the councillors did their best to run it without Darren and Lisbeth. Sheriff Garris then attempted to escort Tommy out of his jurisdiction due to his influence on Megan as she developed a crush on him. Tommy briefly escaped and ran to Jason's grave, but the caretaker had covered it up. Alan's body was now in Jason's place. Tommy was then escorted out of town. That night, Jason murdered the caretaker and a nearby couple who witnessed the murder. Court and a girl named Nikki were then killed by Jason. Sheriff Garris's deputies then found the bodies of the victims, and he immediately implicated Tommy in the murders. Tommy then contacted Megan and convinced her to help him lure Jason back to Camp Crystal Lake. He didn't realise that Jason had already made his way back to the camp and killed Sissy and Paula. He then killed Sheriff Garris and two of his deputies. After arriving at the camp with Tommy, Megan was confronted by Jason. Just as he was about to kill her, Tommy called to him from the lake. Jason left Megan, opting instead to go for his killer, Tommy. Jason then attacked Tommy in a boat in the middle of the lake, but Tommy managed to secure a chain around Jason's neck which was attached to a boulder. Jason jumped onto Tommy and snapped the boat in half, dragging Tommy to the bottom of the lake with him. Jason then strangled Tommy underwater before letting his body float to the surface. Whilst trying to recover Tommy's body, Megan had her leg grabbed by Jason. She then turned the boat's motor on and sliced Jason's throat with it. Back on shore, Tommy was successfully revived by Megan after she used CPR. You may be wondering if Jason died after all that. Comment for part 7 and I'll let you know. You might not believe it, but this story gets even weirder. You've got to love Jason, haven't you?
What? Look in there, mate. Look in there. What? Look in there.
This man got dissected on camera for killing a gang member in Pakistan. This video began going around the internet in late 2021. The video was shot in Pakistan and the gory nature behind the video absolutely shocked the country. The backstory behind the video suggests that the victim, who people referred to as Ramesh, was a worker at a cement factory and was accused of doing a contract killing of a man named Arun who was likely part of some gang. He did it for 1.5 million rupees, which equals 18,000 USD. The victim was accused of cutting off the hand and nose of Arun before killing him. The video that I'm about to explain was recorded for locals to show what happens if you mess with their gang. The video is 2 minutes and 12 seconds long and the setting is in some sort of desert area. As you play the video, you see the victim sitting on the ground and it looks like he's already been beaten since there's blood all over his shirt. A man can then be seen standing over him, grabbing his head aggressively. He's doing this while talking to the victim and accusing him of murdering Arun. The interrogation lasts for about 45 seconds and throughout you can see the victim grimacing in pain, which is most likely from the torture he went through before the video was recorded. And based off the victim's reaction, he already accepted his fate. He doesn't plead or beg for his life, he just has a hopeless expression on his face and it's just disturbing. The man interrogating him is wearing a brown robe and a bunch of combat pouches. And after 45 seconds, the interrogator pulls the victim to the ground and lays him on his back. As he pulls out a long combat knife, he then kneels down next to the victim and grabs his left arm and proceeds to cut into the victim's elbow and cuts deep into the joints. The victim screams out in pain and lets out a couple of groans. The knife is slicing through the joints and skin extremely quickly. And once the flesh has been cut, the killer then twists the victim's arm back and forth, and it makes a horrifying crunching noise that you would never unhear. The killer then cuts the remaining flesh off the arm and rips it off the victim's body. The victim then looks at his stump and his expression is pure shock and fear. And he continues to make light groaning and crying sounds throughout. The same process is then repeated on the victim's right arm and the killer slices and hacks into it before ripping it off. just as he did to his left arm, and somehow after losing liters of blood in both of his arms, the victim is still alive and conscious. The killer then kneels down next to the victim's face and begins following the exact steps that the victim killed Haroon with. He brings the knife to the victim's face and cuts off the tip of his nose. And you can see the victim close his eyes and wince in pain as this happens. The killer then proceeds to cut both of the victim's ears off in a matter of seconds, while casually throwing the severed ears on the ground next to him. The killer then stops and looks at the camera and says, "This is what happens when you go against the Lottie gang." And the video then concludes. There is apparently an extended version of the video showing the victim getting his throat slit right after this happened, which killed him, but I couldn't find it. This video is extremely graphic and has actually been circulating again on various platforms and gore websites. But I advise you not to watch it or go looking for it due to its extreme graphic nature. Please take my word for it, it's honestly horrible.
This schoolboy stabbed his teacher to death in front of a classroom full of students. 61-year-old Anne Maguire was a Spanish teacher teaching in Leeds. She'd actually worked at the school for 40 years and she was only 5 months off retirement. However, in April 2014, something absolutely horrific happened. One of her students was 15-year-old Will Cornick. He'd always been described as a smart student who never really caused any trouble. Classmates regarded him as a polite student, but after he got diagnosed with diabetes, his personality seemed to change. In 2013, he tried to join the army, but because of his diagnosis, he was rejected. Being in the army had been his dream, so this was really upsetting for him. After failing to complete his Spanish homework, he was given detention by Anne. He also expressed a wish to her that he wanted to drop Spanish, but she wouldn't let him, which only angered him more. He began to develop a deep-rooted grudge against Anne. Shockingly, he reportedly messaged his friends on Facebook asking if one of them would kill her for him for £10. During one school day, halfway through his Spanish class, Will decided to get up and attack Anne with a knife. The classmates watched on in horror as he chased her out of the classroom. When there, another teacher heard her screams and tried to shield Anne from any more blows from him. Will then allegedly returned to his class and told his classmates how it was a shame that he hadn't killed her. However, Anne did actually pass away from her injuries. Will later admitted that he did plan also to kill 2 other teachers. One of them was actually pregnant at the time. He's been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 20 years. Mysterious case absolutely does not sit right with me. Someone knows something and has not come forward. On the 12th of July 2015, 18-year-old Tiffany and her parents attended a graduation party in New Jersey. At around 9 p.m, one of Tiffany's friends spoke to her parents and claimed that they were really annoyed because Tiffany had used their debit card without permission. Tiffany initially denied this to her friend, but then did admit this to her mum Diane a little bit later. At this point, they were all outside Tiffany's house and Diane went inside to find her husband. When she returned outside of the house, Tiffany had vanished. Now, they were able to see Tiffany on the deer cameras that they had outside the house. She appears to be walking down the driveway in her normal clothing and white headband. When they tried to find Tiffany, they actually made a terrifying discovery. Her phone was lying on the floor at the bottom of the driveway. Immediately, they knew something was wrong as Tiffany never had her phone out of her sight. At 11:30 p.m, her family called the police. Little did they know, 27 minutes earlier, Tiffany had been hit by a train. Frustratingly, pretty much straight away, police presumed this death to be a self-unaliving. However, that just didn't seem to fit with the evidence presented. All of Tiffany's family and friends said how much of an upbeat person she was and that she was really happy at the time. She was making plans for the future, and the autopsy also showed that she had a clean toxicology report. Now, in the deer cam footage, she was fully clothed, but when she was found, she was just in her underwear with no shoes on. Upsettingly, 2 weeks after her death, Tiffany's mum actually found her missing trainers and headband more than a mile away from the tracks. Could someone have murdered Tiffany and then dumped her body on the train tracks to make it look like she did this herself? Tiffany's parents certainly think so. They definitely suspect some foul play was involved. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door, and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 PM and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered Screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.